trio. Come on out here, because this will be a moment. We have Brianna Silver for our panel.
Kathleen McClelland.
Kathleen McClellan. And Felicia Zussman. So I know a little bit about each of them, and I'll be rather fastidious about this. So Brianna Silver, you've seen her in so many roles today. Woman about town, on the camera, on the stage, and now seated. So all of it in due time. And Brianna believes that we are born with a superpower. Her superpower is clarity. So I'm going to bring her wherever I go now, from now on, bringing a purpose-driven focus to her clients as the president of Silver Consulting. Kathleen McClelland, center, right? Yes. Is the senior manager of Consummate Insights for Tyson. And I don't know about you, but my refrigerator and my freezer, I bet you're the same, might have at least one Tyson item. And in the consumer insights professional role of this iconic brand in the food industry. Welcome, Kathleen. And my last introduction of the day, Felicia Zussman, is attended first grade. I'm going really personal here. First grade in a one-room schoolhouse. And now how does this feel? Is this larger than the one-room schoolhouse?
It's a little bit bigger.
A little bit bigger? Okay. And has close family living, listen to this, all over the world. So reunions might be expensive and a lot of fun as you trolley around the countries and the earth to Japan, India, the Middle East, and Mexico. How do we get on that list for your family reunions? We'll let you discuss that and more. Best wishes, and we'll tune in right now. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Stephanie. Well, we are the very last session before the end of the day, and I hope that many of you will join us for cocktails down the street. But we are here to talk about the responsibility of powerful women leading the future of CX. But I would actually invite all folks in the room, whether you are a woman or you are not, to cue into this, because it's not about necessarily what women versus men do, or sort of the power of women compared to the power of men, but it's more of like, what is our responsibility as CX leaders? And we have a little bit of a flavor of sort of our unique perspective as women into this conversation. So I'm just going to sort of set things up, and then I'll pose a number of questions to Felicia and Kathleen. And just to acknowledge the fact that unfortunately Melissa couldn't make it today. She fell ill this morning, unfortunately. So we are down to 3, but we are a powerful 3 and we will do it. So, we talk about the responsibility of powerful women leading the future of CX. And so what does that really mean? Throughout today, we've been talking about, various different ways in which organizations are seeking to elevate the voice of their customers, getting them a seat at the table, if you will. We've also branched out to say, how are we elevating the voice of our employees to support them in being the best employee possible, but then also in spirit of that CX goal. And so what we're here to really talk about is how do you do that? So we're all up here and we're talking about, we want to do this, we're doing this, but how do you start to think about it from a formulaic perspective of how do you actually do this? And what we are proposing is that we take a lens of equity to this conversation. And we have a framework around equity that I'm going to share. But before I do that, I think it's also important to just acknowledge what's changing. It used to be, and we're seeing it in the conversation today, that CX was sort of this thing that was out there. It was an arm's length away in the sense of we want to do everything well for the customer, but we don't want to change ourselves in that process. And then now we're having to look at what do we need to change internally to better enable that, like the conversation around employee experience. I could invite you to also take a look at that from an operational standpoint and basically every function of the business and talk about how they also can change themselves to really be aligning to customer experience. And Felicia's going to talk to us a lot about that today. But there's also another thing that's changing, and that is, at least I come from the world of design. into customer insights, into customer experience by way of user experience. So, a lot of different lenses through which to look at this conversation. And, when I was getting my schooling in this, which was, about 20 years ago now, the focus was always around how do we make our products desirable, feasible, and viable. And I would say that's still the mantra that many people talk about from an innovation perspective, at least. And I would say, I think that it's changing. And some recent work that my organization has had the pleasure to do around the future of design and business proves this out as well. That's a publication that's forthcoming. But it's no longer good enough to be desirable, feasible, and viable. You also have to act with that level of integrity, which requires you to be just, be sustainable, and to be inclusive. And so, this coupled with the purpose-driven, mission-driven perspective with which many organizations operate that say, we want to do good in the world, we're actively working to do good in the world, and whatever their tenor of that expression is, when you start to look at how do you create just, inclusive, and sustainable experiences that also happen to be desirable, feasible, and viable, you have to start having this conversation around equity. And so when it comes to equity, we're going to get into that in a second. But before we do that, I want to just have both of these ladies introduce themselves as a way just so that you understand the perspective that they're coming into the conversation. So Kathleen, I'll have you start. If you can just share your name, your organization, and then specifically where customer experience comes into your work.
Absolutely. So my name is Kathleen McClelland. I work in consumer insights at Tyson. I've been there for about 5 years. And specifically, customer experience comes through so many lenses. We think about the end consumer as the customer, and we also think about our grocery stores and different channels that we work with. But then internally, too, it's important just to think about all the different ways that customer experience can come to life. And I think that in my role, I'm the voice of the consumer and need to be continually thinking through and working with the different functions within Tyson to make sure that we're getting the best product out to all of our consumers.
And Felicia, thank you.
I'm Felicia Zussman. I work at Blue Cross Blue Shield Association. I work in a team that is consumer experience. That is what our team is called. But what's really interesting about the group I work with is there are actually 36 different Blue Cross Blue Shield plans across the country. So you may have heard of Anthem or Highmark or Horizon. These are different Blue Cross Blue Shield companies. They use that trademark. And they license it from the organization I work for, the Blue Cross Blue Shield Association. And I have this really distinct pleasure that I get to work with the CX leads of all of those organizations. I help bring them together to talk about what we're all doing and how can we work in a unified and differentiated way across the entire country and actually expanding a little beyond that. So it's really unique that I get to think about the consumer really holistically, like the end customer, but also the others in our ecosystem, but really have this ripple impact across 36 different companies that I get to work with on a regular basis.
Excellent. So you can see they're coming from very different perspectives, which was intentional and by design. And so, when it comes to what is our responsibility? So it is our responsibility as CX leaders to really support more equitable development and decision-making in our work. And so, why is this a topic for this panel that's around powerful women leading the future of CX? And one of the things that came up a lot in the conversation as we were preparing for this panel was just the role that women play in decision-making. Kathleen was talking about, at least from a consumer brand perspective, 70 to 80% of purchasing decisions are either made by a woman or highly influenced by a woman. I'm not sure what that equivalent would be for a B2B context, but certainly among all the panelists, and Melissa included, bringing in this essence of diversity as part of that inclusion was a big part of it. But then really where that then sort of took another turn is I've recently had the pleasure of actually doing some equity training because my organization has been chosen as the prototyping and design thinking partner for the American Cities Climate Challenge. And what really struck me in that training was this notion of this how they defined equity. And they defined equity as the process of correcting broken systems in order to eliminate disparate outcomes. And when I heard that, I was like, wow, like, of course, this is all on my mind that I'm going to have to get up here and moderate this panel. But I was like, that's what we're all doing in CX, is we're trying to fix broken systems that have basically been designed from the perspective of the business, and specifically from the perspective of the business to make money in a very capitalistic-driven society. Yet today, everything is turned to be more purpose-driven, mission-driven. Maybe everybody's not doing the best job of succeeding on that right now, but there's a desire. There's sort of a triple aim impact that people are going after. And just as CX leaders in general, we are responsible for basically asking organizations, is the way we've always done it the way we want to continue to do it? And then pushing and shepherding them in that process. And so, I had promised that we would present this framework, and then we're going to share a lot of stories against this framework. But we're going to present the framework, and we're going to talk about it from both an internal and an external perspective. So there's sort of 3 different lenses at which you can look at equity and building more equity into your development and decision-making processes for your CX divisions, and then really, frankly, across the entire organization. The first is what's called procedural equity. And so this is like actually the tactics of how you are going to engage your customers. How are you really going to elevate their voice? What are the ways that you capture their voice? We talked a lot about different ways that voice was captured, either solicited or unsolicited. But also then, like, how are you actually going to be sure that the organization is listening and prioritizing that voice when those decisions are being made? The second is what's called distributional equity. And this is really about making sure that unintended consequences are not occurring as a result of your desire to elevate the voice of the customer. And so, are you going in with all eyes wide open? And do you have everyone's best interests at heart, or at least are addressing where those may be challenged in the broader system? And then the third is what's called structural equity. And this is like, how are you actually ensuring that all these intentions to operate with a higher level of integrity and purpose are indeed occurring? And how are you measuring that? How are you setting that up? So that you're really truly sustaining you're transforming your organization in a sustainable way. And so we're going to dive into each of these, and I'm going to first ask Kathleen to talk to us about procedural equity, because this is her job. Like, this is what she does every single day, is helping Tyson go out and get the voice of the customer. And she's helping them to get the voice of the customer, not just with the end consumer, but also her channel partners, and having to work, sometimes that works amazingly and other times not so much. So Kathleen, I would love for you to talk to us a little bit about how you go about that and how it's changed the culture at Tyson for how you've moved in that process in the recent past.
Absolutely. So it is my job every day, and I love my job. It's the most amazing thing to be able to speak for consumers and also remind people that we're all consumers, so we can relate. Most people in this room have probably had chicken or Tyson chicken, hopefully. But it's also important to understand that we're not going to be raising our hands and saying, N of one, my husband does this, my cousin does this. It's important to understand the breadth of our consumers, and that in our seats, we aren't necessarily always our consumers. Our consumers come from many different walks of life. And so it's important to empathize with them, understand who they are, what their needs are, and what their expectations are. And that's the way, if we understand all of those things, we can deliver on them better. Oftentimes, consumers are just overwhelmed with the number of messages that can come their way. One of my jobs is to understand what are the most critical things that really matter to the consumer, because as they're shopping along, they probably aren't thinking about the 8 claims that we have on the package. They're probably thinking about their son's soccer practice, or the fact that they have an early morning meeting the next day. And so knowing that we have a very limited part of their thought process, how can we communicate to them that we have a product that's going to make your life a little bit easier? And I think a lot of that is making sure that the organization, regardless of what function they're in, is getting out and being with our consumers, getting out and being with our customers as well, partnering with our customers as well as partnering with our consumers to develop products and communication that's going to meet their needs. And then continuing to check in with them once we launch that communication, once we launch those products, and make sure that we are hitting the mark. Otherwise, we're just not going to be relevant. And so I think that stripping it down and really trying to simplify the message and then the benefit for the product, that's what gets me excited, because I think that we have products that really do meet a need. And so the more that we can get that out there, I think it's really exciting.
Yeah, one thing I want to build on here is, because when I was talking with Kathleen preparing for this, and then also Melissa, both of them had very similar tenors in the sense of, going through the entire life cycle of insight, I guess is maybe the best way of saying it. In the sense of, I know Kathleen, you dedicate half a day on Friday to just thinking about what is the needs that I haven't even thought about and how to capture those. And then, of course, the normal things that would be in your product development that you're trying to either look at the opportunity for, or once it's been developed and getting out there. Yeah. But you also shared something else, and I'm putting you a little bit on the spot here, but you also shared something else really around kind of the future that you see around this, and it was around sort of the iterative feedback loop.
Yes. Okay. So just in terms of making sure that we're continuing to get feedback so that we can be nimble and make decisions kind of on the fly. And I think that continually getting feedback throughout the process and even after launch, that just helps us, because we can just do the small corrections and the small shifts just to make a better product and better communication with our consumers.
Yeah, and to build on that, and I don't know if it was you now or Melissa that said that, but it struck me because it also harkened back to something, a prior conversation that I had recently had before that, which was the fact of, we don't necessarily reward people for their feedback today. But they're already your customer, right? And so just rewarding them for giving you feedback, positive or negative, being sort of a way to really hearken that continuous improvement. All right, so we're going to move on to the distributional equity. And so this is about, what are the specific actions that are being taken within your organization to ensure that system changes being made are not resulting in unintended consequences, either for your customers, your business, or even the industry at large. So, what are you doing to support making sure that you're looking at the full system, ecosystem impact, essentially, of your work? So, Felicia shared a little bit about sort of the complex environment in which she works, which is great. And so, Felicia, I'd like for you to share some strategies that you lead your teams through in terms of how to mitigate the risks of those unintended consequences.
Thank you so much. Yes, health insurance is not all that complex, right? And then the ecosystem in which I work, really not that complex. But we're trying to find ways to simplify, to make it easier to navigate that ecosystem. And the first thing we had to do was understand what it was. So that was our first strategy, is mapping out all the players that we're connecting to, all the stakeholders that we're working with. The group that I work with was really built to have an impact on that end consumer, to bring the insights around what they're experiencing, what they're going through to light. But what we had to do is, you just can't ignore the larger world that we all live in. And so we really spent time understanding who those other stakeholders are. When you're talking about providers that are the doctors, the hospital systems, whether the pharmacy, when you talk about a doctor, you're talking about their front staff, their nurses, you're talking about that whole office and how that all works. And so we've been doing a lot of work in trying to understand who all those players are and what they're working towards, and how we can start to have an impact on all those broader experiences. Those are not all owned necessarily by the group I work with, but we're starting to create very strategic partnerships and collaborations throughout my organization to say, how can we use some of the tools we have to impact the work that you're doing? Because we do have a different way of working, and how do we start speaking the same language, and how do we start to have a positive impact going through that we're all considering all these stakeholders and where we're going in the same direction. So how do we go towards that same vision for all of them? So it's been a really interesting journey. I've seen some uptick in this more recently, which has been exciting. What's great is I get to look at all the other Blue Cross Blue Shield plans, see what they're doing, and I can see that some have already started to move there, and where my group is going, we're definitely having impact, and then I can see more momentum happening. So it's really exciting to see that by starting to form those relationships and those collaborations, that we're able to have a bigger impact in not just the end consumer, but all those, like you talked about, your customer. We talk a lot about the employers that choose the products that we have and make them available. How do we partner with them better to reflect what we can offer? So it's been a really interesting time to actually put those strategies into play.
Well, and I think what's so interesting about this story for Felicia, and it goes back to, I'm not sure now which presenter it was, but it was all around the aspect of what is the intended outcomes? Because each of the people that she's serving has a different perspective of the intended outcomes in that system, right? So every strategy that they decide to put in is then going to have a different impact based upon that intended outcome. And maybe, and you may consciously make the choice at certain times to say, it's okay that they aren't gonna like this. But at the same time, like in Kathleen's perspective, because we had another conversation around, oftentimes will run like partnership things. Do you wanna share that story?
Sure, and jump in if it's the wrong story that I'm sharing. But basically, it's really important for the consumer insights team to be partnering with our consumers and with our customers, and oftentimes we'll do co-creation. So we'll bring in and actually ideate with consumers. We've done this with customers as well, just in terms of being fully transparent and just strong partners, understanding what their needs are, understanding what their expectations are, and just being able to have real life conversations. I think that there are times and places for focus groups behind the glass, and there are times and places to be with your consumer and really just be there and listen and understand. So I think that hopefully that was the right one, and if it wasn't,
yes,
jump in.
It was, and then also just the notion of that, looking at the mission of Tyson, and what is the exact mission?
It's now you're really putting me on the spot.
I know.
But it's about showing the world how much good food can do. So it's about feeding the world, and it's about feeding, the people who don't have as much disposable income, and it's about people who have a lot of disposable income. It's about people who have lots of time on their hands and can cook a lot, which is not me. And then it's about people who really need a quick solution. And so our consumers really span the gamut, and understanding that and just really kind of being with and stepping into your consumer's shoes as much as possible, I think just gets us closer to delivering that experience for them.
And I think coming back to our prior conversation, the other piece that I thought was really valuable connected to that, so they have this mission to make food accessible to all, right? Mm-hmm. Whether those are the exact words or not, right? And there's different channel partners to support that. So they've got, the partners for Safeway, they've got Aldi, they got all these different partners, and they all play a role in this broader ecosystem to support that mission. Mm-hmm. But coming back to the comment around Felicia, they all have a different expected outcome in that process. And so being able to manage all of those as you're working on your CX, leadership strategies is really important. The next one we want to talk about, and I'm going to shoot it to Felicia again here, is really around structural equity. So structural equity is really around what are those systems and operations that you're putting in place to truly allow for your organization to achieve its goals. Like, what are you doing to actually institutionalize equity coming into the frame of reference and doing it in a way that's truly transforming and sustainable for your business. So Felicia has helped to, I don't know if you've led it or helped, but they have a pretty rigorous design sprints methodology happening over at Blue Cross Blue Shield. And we are super lucky to have her here today because she literally stepped out of one of these to come over here for a couple hours. So thank you. But Felicia and her team have really helped to build the competency and belief, the value structure around CX over at Blue Cross Blue Shield. So I'd love for you to explain what that methodology is, how you institutionalized it, and how you know it's being effective.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, I stepped out for just a little bit, but I left a great group managing things back at the other location. But yeah, we built our team with a very strong competency in human-centered design, and brought that competency to Blue Cross Blue Shield Association. And with that, we brought a set of skills of how do you actually start with listening to the consumer, and how do you start to design your experiences, not just being reactive, but being very proactive. And we did a lot of work to say, okay, now how do we actually start to institutionalize that? How do we start to bring more people along, be very inclusive to really make an impact? And the methodology that we really, that seemed to really catch on was this idea of a design sprint. Design sprint vernacular has a lot of different meanings to a lot of different people. When we talk about design sprints, we're talking about coming together for a short, focused period of time, usually 3 to 4 days, to work on one challenge at a time with a cross-disciplinary group. We've done this to create vision statements, to create vision experiences, where we'd spend 3 or 4 days starting with the idea of what are the consumer challenges, listening to real consumers, playing back research, diving into it, and going through the idea of it now, what are the core values of our brand, and how do we start to bring those to life to create a new experience, a new journey for them. And we've also started to do this work more traditionally with the Google mentality of if you've read Sprint, the idea of how do you move from the idea of focus all the way through building a prototype and sharing with consumers. But when we do this over 4 days. We bring not just those that are CX leads at our different organizations that we work with, or even within the association, we make sure to extend all invitations to business partners, because CX can't be done in isolation. We can't all impact the consumer on our own. It's really those that are in the operations side of things, in the product design side of things, the communications. And we bring in those subject matter experts and those that are gonna have to have buy-in as well as have the expertise to bring some of those insights to life. We have them come together and work with us for a short period of times. We ask them to leave their computers at home and come together for 4 days, which is a lot to ask. To give up your work for 4 days that you're never normally doing, maybe do your emails in the morning, but give very focused attention. And we're able to move from a focus of a problem to solve around the consumers, like how does a consumer, really understand health insurance? These are big issues. So how do we start to tackle those and break those down into pieces that we can start to work on together? We go from focus through ideation, how do we try to solve this, to prototyping. What are something that we can actually share based on the problems we're now trying to solve? And then we share those with consumers on the 4th day. We bring consumers in, we show them what we're working on and get the real feedback. We listen more than we talk and say, what are you thinking? How does this help with the situations you're having? And we're able to create quick iterations and prototypes that now spread throughout the entire system. So it's really been dynamic and something we've been able to start to institutionalize of bringing this along, this idea of how do we work together in small bursts to really have a bigger impact. And what we've seen is that we get a variety of different people. We leave titles at the door, but I'll tell you that we had chief technology officer, many VPs, as well as those that are more on the front line in customer service. And it's wonderful because you're all coming together with your expertise and you're really starting to see things starting to change because of it.
Well, and what I love about that too is that you're building empathy in that process, not just with the customer, but with each other. So, and it's not just, the CX leaders who are supposed to really care about the customers.
Yes.
But, all the people who maybe could go through their daily job and never actually really think about the customer, but bringing them into the conversation, they're building that empathy with the customer, but probably even more important, they're building it with each other. So when somebody in operations, says, oh, we should just develop this communication and send it out, and the person in the communications team said, well, that's not as easy as you think it is. Let's discuss what that really looks like. And then, they can get to some powerful results in just the span of, 4 days. So we've been talking up to this point really about sort of how do you build in this framework of equity just to sort of up-level, if you will, your CX work. I think there's also something to be said around how do you bring equity more into the teams in which you're building. And so this is going to be sort of more probably focused to women in the room. And that is, in the sense of, I think one thing that was very clear as we were planning for this session is I think that there is a deep responsibility that each one of us as women, leaders, feel, a level of gratefulness for the people who have paved the way for us up to this point and, had our backs and sort of told us what to do and what not to do leading into, where we sit today, but then also a responsibility for being able to sustain and share that. And one of the things I really want to have Kathleen speak to, because one thing about Kathleen is that she's got 4 children.
I do.
And so we were chatting and planning for all of this of just like, what happens when you start to have kids, right? Because for some women, that's the moment where they feel like their career ends. I know that when I was pregnant, my husband came to me and he said, so you're gonna start taking like a couple days off a week, right? I'm like, no. If I do that, we don't have a business anymore, honey. Like, I'm the one who's on the front line of the business. Like, that is not sustainable for what we wanna do. But it required like him to change his perspective, for me to get really clear about what I wanted, and realize that, no, you can't do it all, but you can do it in a prioritized way. And so, Kathleen, you had some really great stories to share about this.
Sure, absolutely. So I do have 4 children. They are 7, 5, 3, and almost 1 next week. So I'm very busy and very thankful for the help that I have. I do work full time, and I'm very thankful for that as well. It's kind of nice to get out of the house. But for me, before I had kids, I kind of was a workaholic because I really like insights. I mean, I really, really like my job. And so I would just find myself just engaged in work. And then I started having kids and realized that, I had to juggle things a little bit more. And what I ended up doing is just shifting my priorities. I also became more experienced and more efficient, which helped. And I am really thankful for the women and men who have been supervisors to me and leaders in companies that I've worked at who have set the example and have understood that at the end of the day, it's just chicken. It'll be there tomorrow. We're continuing to feed the world, but I'm not, operating on anyone. No one is dying. And it's important in the long run, like thinking about just my career as a marathon and not a sprint. Although we have lots of sprints too, which is, I thought that was pretty cool that we both have that. That if I continue to work all hours, then I'm going to burn out. And that's not what I want. It's not good for me. It's not good for my family. It's also not good for the company. And the company knows that. And so it's been in the best interest of my companies, as well as for me, to make it work and be flexible. And in my experience, as long as you're performing, then there's that flexibility. If there's something that comes up with the family comes first. And that's really, really important for Tyson, and that's why I am really proud to work there. So my expectations have changed a little bit. We do take out a little bit more, home cooking a little bit less, lots of chicken nuggets in my house. But, but I'm good with that. I'm happy with that. And I think that I'm being an example. I've got 3 girls and 1 boy. I think I'm being an example to them as well. And my kids, they pretend, they're like, I'm going to be late to this meeting. And they just, run around the house. And you know what? I'm happy to be a great example to them as well.
That's great. Thank you. And then Felicia, you talked a lot when we got around to this conversation about, how, where you are today, what your responsibility to future generations are. And I know that you put a lot of effort into mentoring others because you've been mentored a lot yourself. Can you talk about that experience?
Yeah, I feel very privileged that I've worked under, had some very great mentors in my life, as well as great managers, bosses, leaders, and many of them have been women. And I've kept those relationships going because I feel like it's not only those times that you're reporting directly to someone or have someone reporting to you, but it's also those other times that you want to be able to call in those relationships. I feel like it's those formal connections, but also those informal relationships, the informal mentorship that start to can really have an impact, knowing that who you can help or who you can go to for help when you need really assistance. So I've really seen the last few years of been seeking out those that I can help mentor, those that are at that sort of moment in their career when they're trying to decide what they're doing, and have those longer conversations. It's not a short conversation that you have with somebody about a half hour of what do you want to do. It's really about how do you step outside the work experience that you're having and talk about what your true values are and what you're working towards. What are your priorities, and understanding that someone's priorities are not the same as your own. And so being able to then listen to someone and help them be guided by their own decision and what's right for them. And that's a lot of the work I've been able to do sort of on the side, working with a number of people in my organization. It's been really meaningful to me, but also hopefully I've seen it give back to the organization as people decide what's right for them and where they want to go. So it's been impactful.
That's
Yeah.
great. And I know one other key thing that came up as a thread in all of our conversations in prep was really just being empowered to step into your most authentic self. And both of these women are in organizations, thankfully, that really celebrate that. Tyson, I loved your, was it 5 C's? And one of the C's is candor. And so, Kathleen is responsible for insight. She's supposed to be that voice. And if she's not being it, then she's not doing her job. But I think also, when it comes to, what does it really mean to be your most authentic self? I'll just leave us with this and then open it up for a couple questions. One of probably the most powerful business books that I have ever read, so I would write this down, is The Big Leap. It's written by Gay Hendricks. And in this book, it presents that there is a zone of genius. And so it's sort of the zone of incompetence. So it's basically a 2x2 map. The zone of incompetence is basically anybody can do this job better than you can. This task is so not for you, essentially. Then there's the zone of competence, and that's the sense that you can do it, anybody can do it. It's really not a point of difference for who you are, but it's a task, right? Then there's the zone of excellence, and these are the tasks that you do that everybody sort of knows you for. But they may or may not give you energy. They may actually suck the energy right out of you. So for me, editing fits into that. I've been asked to be an editor many, many times, and every time I accept the job, I hate it the second time I start to do it because it just sucks the energy out of me. And then you've got your zone of genius. And that's basically the area, all the things that you would be doing they just literally light you up. They fuel you from the inside out and make you who you are. And when everybody sees you doing those things, they're just like, wow, that person's amazing. But it's because you're really stepping into who you are, who you uniquely are. And, so when it comes to, both of the stories, really, Felicia's helping other women, other people, maybe not just women on her team, but, other people to say, who are you? Who do you want to be? What values do you want to stand for? And helping them to achieve those goals. And, same with Kathleen. And I think that's probably why you've been able to be such a badass now, right? It's because you've figured out, where to put your priority and focus, and you've done it because you've zeroed in on what makes you uniquely you, and just let everything else, fall to the wayside. So if you don't know what makes you uniquely you, I would highly suggest that you pick up that book and do that exercise. But we do have about 11 minutes left, and if there's any questions, we can take those, or we can hit the bar a little early, too. Any questions? Yes?
So this one's mostly geared towards Felicia. Just curious, in the healthcare industry, from my experience in talking to other people, not a very positive light.
Yeah.
So how do you manage that going forward? And what
I'm glad you brought that. I mean, it's just sort of that thing in the room. Like, I'm in consumer experience in healthcare. I will say that I've not always been in this line of work in this industry. I came in about just 3 years ago. I just had my anniversary there. Looking to bring some of what I've learned in other industries here because I feel like it's the right time. I feel like there's this opportunity, right? Because there's an opportunity there. And I was like, yes, we can start to make change, but it's going to happen slowly. So I see that there needs to be a future there, or we need to embrace CX if we're going to have a future, because right now, the way people interact with their health is drastically changing. And the expectations that people have for the companies they work with has drastically changed. So a lot of what I get to do on a daily basis is start to talk about that story, who our real competitors are, because they're not the people we've been used to around us, and how we need to meet the consumer and the other stakeholders in a whole different way. It needs to change. There's a group of us there very passionate about this, because there needs to be this opportunity is there, and we need to be starting to really move in it. Thank you for asking.
I was intrigued by your layers of equity, and particularly the equity around unintended consequences. Given your years of leadership experience, see if I can frame this right. Do you have any stories about how you work with other layers of leadership to manage or provide scaffolding around unintended consequences when you're trying to get feedback from other workers or from other customers?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think that there's sort of two different ways you got to look at this. One is just who are all the people in the ecosystem who should be consulted in that process. Who will be impacted, whether directly or indirectly, and like literally doing a full stakeholder map, which I don't think always is necessarily done. I think it's pretty common practice in some of the more complex industries, but less so in maybe the less complex industries. But then when you do that, then it's also looking at what are the vested interests in keeping the current system working the way that it's working. And so there's a whole field of study that's around adaptive leadership. And it's taking, because a lot of the work that I do is around helping organizations to lead the transformation of their brands into the future. And so everybody wants to transform, but nobody wants to change. And so there's always a lot of pushback, right? Like, everybody externally thinks, yes, we want to be in a different place, but thinking through all the steps to make that other place happen, it gets really scary. And the fear can be coming from a lot of different places. It can be coming from, my position of power within the current system is going to be gone. It could just be from a priority perspective, like I already have 20 things on my plate, and now you want to put 2 additional really big things on my plate. So there's lots of different reasons as to why the fear can get spun up. But I think it's always really helpful to when you're starting to make those changes, taking the pushback that you may be getting and categorizing it into things that are truly technical challenges, which is something like, hey, we want to do this new messaging campaign, but your legacy system won't support that kind of messaging campaign. And so that's not a pushback by, this is the way we've always done it. It's just like literally we don't have the technology to do it. And so that's a financial resources conversation to start having with executive leadership. But it's also then taking all the other pushback to say, is this really an adaptive challenge? Is this because somebody feels threatened in that system, or they're feeling overwhelmed, or whatever kind of a negative emotion that you're kicking up, triggering emotion. And then at that point, it's about dealing with that differently. Then it's about saying, okay, if, I understand that this is what your expected outcome is of this system. This is what this person's expected outcome is. And then you can engage them in those collaborative conversations. Like, I'm a big proponent of workshops and facilitation, much like Felicia talked about, because I feel like once you can get people in the same room and having a truly collaborative conversation, not like a charged position territory type of conversation, but one where you're really coming and you're trying to find an amenable solution that will really support everyone, I feel like you can have those conversations. Now, there's some groundwork that has to happen to make that possible, and I find that there's oftentimes a lot of follow-up that needs to happen to remind people why they got impassioned, inspired to make the choices that they made in the room, because the reality is when they get back to their work, it's easy to fall into line. And so there's some other tools, like collaborative inquiry is a big tool that we utilize in our work that really supports the integration of insight back into their particular work, whatever lens they're coming to the problem with, and then getting them to commit to next step actions that they personally are going to take in their work that really helps to fuel that transformational change that everybody says they want. I think in their heart really do want, but just the navigation process becomes very scary in the process of.
Kathleen, I really like your phrase, it's just chicken. Talking about work-life balance, but thankfully I don't work in an environment, I work in an environment that has very good work-life balance, but I worry about what we're setting up as a culture of startup culture, 80 hours a week, gaining meaning and belonging through work, and how do we help prevent an entire generation from burning themselves out? Curious if you have any thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the more that leadership can set the example, then I think that that's going to help just set the tone for the rest of the organization. I've been in organizations that I've been doing research for about 10 years, and I've worked in big food for all of them at 3 different places. And there have been times where we have no meeting Fridays, and that gives people a chance to actually think and do work and plow through their emails, and also toss in a little laundry, which is wonderful. Summer hours is another thing that I think really helps boost morale, and just especially being in Chicago. The summer is a treasured season that is way too short. And I, early on, right after I had kids, I would kind of apologize for bowing out of meetings. If I had to leave, if I had a doctor's appointment, I couldn't, for one of the kids, I couldn't get in. And I noticed that my male colleagues didn't apologize. If they had to leave, they left. And it really wasn't a big deal, because again, it's just chicken. And so I've stopped apologizing, because I know I bring a lot to the table. And just because I might not be at my desk, and actually, even when I'm at work, I'm not at my desk that much because I'm in meetings, right? But I have just figured out a way to prioritize, do work on the train, do work after the kids go to bed sometimes, a lot of times I don't, and just figure out a way to be a little more efficient. I was talking to somebody right before I came over here today, and I said, I think I owe you an email. And she said, no, it got resolved. And actually, so there's a lot of that too. There's a lot of times I wait about 24 hours and the issue gets resolved. And then it's like less work on me. And so I think it's about figuring out, like, what are the things that are going to drive the business forward? What are the decisions that need to be made today that I can impact? And then the rest is gravy, And so if I can feel really good about my work and what I'm bringing to the table, then it seems like the people that I work with respect that and understand. So be that example. I just think everybody should be that example, and just stop apologizing to live your life and hang out with your family or your friends or whoever you want to hang out with.
Excellent. That might be a really good ending point. Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you to all of you.